My first computer was actually this is a slightly obscure, the TRS-80. Slightly obscure, the TRS-80.
Not obscure to me, but yes.
And I think it had 4K. It was really primitive. I fairly quickly after that got an Atari 800, which I liked because I wanted an Apple II, but the Atari 800 was more affordable and had the 6502 for those who remember. And back then I was doing I started with BASIC and then sort of assembly language, and I really cared about the chip. So I mean, I was a kid, so like it was all about video games to me. So it was all video games for, gosh, what was the first great video game? I mean, I used to play, I loved the text games like Zork, it's Infocom. I'm forgetting now, but these, for those who don't know, is very creative text-based adventure games that I really loved, and that was the first thing I did. I learned how to do an if-then statement, and I was like, I wrote these programs that were probably the worst software programming ever. That was like 1,000 if-then statements trying to create adventure games. And then I got into graphics, and I don't know. I went through that whole kind of era of Apple II games and. Well, I had the original Atari 2600 VCS, and then I had every console as it related to video games. I had that, and well, then I guess I mostly played on the computer, Atari 800 for a long time, and then I got back into it with like the Genesis and PlayStation 2 and all of that. But then really mostly was PC after that. I mean, for me, the other big formative video game moment was Doom. I mean, Doom was, it's hard to describe to kids today what a like bombshell that was on the nerd world. It was like, it was probably it was amazing on so many different levels, right? It was technically amazing. It was
on the basic level of, it was 3D. It was the first time you felt like
there was
you were moving through the world.
3D, but like this was real 3D. Like this was the real thing. And then just culturally, it was the first kind of like, it was like gory and it was sort of in some ways a precursor to things like Grand Theft Auto, and just it was like cool and culturally zeitgeist. And then it was also like, by the way, just as a internet person, it was the first real freemium game
for sure.
Where they gave away a bunch of levels. I mean, it encouraged modding, so you could like hack it, and it was just monumental in so many ways. Well, so I grew up in Ohio. My parents were university professors. And so I used to go, I guess late 80s and go in the early 90s before Mosaic, and go on Telnet. I go to their offices and on these terminals, and I used to Telnet. I used to play, I believe I played Core Wars back then, if you know Core Wars. This is like super nerdy stuff. Oh, this is like Core Wars is a video game. I'll put that in mega quotes.
Was that like Trade Wars 2002?
No. Core Wars, you actually write viruses that fight other computer viruses. Now they all happen in a sandbox, so there's no actual danger to anybody, but you actually write kind of in this pseudo assembly language. And there was this big culture around it back then. So there were these like programming video games that were, Core Wars was really cool. There was one called C Robots, where you'd write a robot in C and fight each other. And there would be these things where you telnet in, you upload your program, and then somebody runs on the server King of the Hill battle, and you don't actually get to watch it because it's the old internet. And then they would send the results out, and that was like a big deal because they all fought each other, and then you found out who won. So I used to do that. I had I think I had the precursor to AOL. It was like a thing you plugged into your Atari. I got to go look up if I'm right about that history. I believe I did.
Yeah, it was, because it was Von Meister. He was the guy. I think they did that for Atari. Then I
think I was one of the like 10,000 subscribers.
Yeah,
there were like 10,000 subscribers, and you plugged in a thing to your Atari that actually had a phone line thing.
Bill Von Meister, who founded what eventually became AOL with Steve Case, they did that, and then they pivoted to doing it for Mac.
Yes,
and then that
I'm pretty sure I had one of the. I mean, I had that thing for my. I believe it was their thing. I did have this. You plug in your Atari 2600, to your phone line, and then every morning or every week you'd get a new video game. So that, I don't know if that counts as online. I did CompuServe, I did Prodigy, I was really into all this
Yeah,
stuff.
I was gonna
I did
say.
BBSs. I used to call up. You had to get your parents to like let you use a phone line,
Well,
but
I
I
was
used to
going to ask
call
that,
up.
like, because my question for some people is, was it GeoCities? Was it MySpace? Where was the first time you found community um,
Yeah.
on the internet?
I used to go. I mean, I was in Ohio, but like I'd also go. I'd go, and there used to be these meetups. Essentially, you'd go. I do all these in-person things too. I was lucky enough to grow up near this Air Force base that had a big computer division, and I go there, and there was all these kind of, I didn't know at the time, but like Air Force computer guys, and we were like teach each other how to program and stuff. But yeah, I'd say BBSs too. I was into that stuff. Like like you'd call up. I mean, it was back then you had to pay money for the long distance stuff. Oh gosh, I think I resisted it for a while. Like I was like, oh, I don't want to. I actually had a beeper at one point, believe it or not. I thought I was really cool, and you had like these codes you'd send each other. I don't remember I actually don't remember. Then I got into, but I do have a good long smartphone history. Like I was a Power Sidekick user for years.
Mm.
I don't know if folks remember that. That was like by far the coolest pre-iPhone.
In like 2003, 2004.
Yeah,
Paris Hilton was always getting
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. But what was cool about it was totally open, and you could telnet and SSH and do all these kind of computer things, and it had this really nice flip thing and a keyboard. But it was a full terminal. It was great.
But you had to go through a BlackBerry phase too.
Did I? No, I think I was pure Sidekick up until
it? Oh wow.
I think I went. I'm always like this open systems, open source kind of person. I don't think I did. I got the iPhone on the day it came out. I had to carry two phones around for 2 years. I remember, because I was like, I had a startup and I had to actually stay on the phone calls, and they remember they just had Singular, and it would like drop calls forever, but it was like this phone from the future, so I had to have it. So. But I delivered newspapers as a kid forever, and then I worked at Domino's Pizza. I delivered pizza in Ohio. What I do, I worked in the computer room at school for a while. I basically figured out that I could make money programming, and I programmed for years. I transferred to school in New York, college in New York, and I worked at a law firm doing computer programming. I don't know, for those who know this stuff, like Edgar filing, formatting software. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well. And then I worked at a hedge fund for a little while, for about 2 years. And then I discovered this is around like late 90s. I discovered the world of startups and entrepreneurship, and sort of fell in love. I was like, wait a second, I don't want to, I was sort of on autopilot, just programming, and realized that like I wanted to, I don't know, I thought this idea, wow, you can go create a company and create a product and do kind of semi-technical stuff and business. And it was just like, whoa, that was an epiphany. And then that's when I kind of began my real career. My biggest kind of, I don't know if it's not a real regret, but I do kind of wonder, I was in that, like I made a lot of interesting software. I mean, again, put it all in context. This was the late 80s, early 90s. So like it's all crap by today's standards. But I always wonder why. I always thought about like sending in my games to try to become a game developer or something. And I just never, I don't know why, but I just didn't think I could do it or something. And in retrospect, like I should have done what like these kind of I'm not saying I'm John Carmack by any means, but like that genre of people, like these kinds of game developers from that era who went off and published games and did stuff. And I don't know. I think I was afraid to. I don't know. I didn't want to get rejected, I guess. And didn't do that. So that was, I don't know if that was it was entrepreneurial. I should have been doing that in my teenage years. It's not like a huge regret or something. I just think it would have been kind of cool. What else? I think that, after, like I mentioned, afterwards, I kind of caught the bug. And then that's when I started a security company in the early 2000s, and then kind of went from there. Yeah. So I sold my first, I didn't have money to invest essentially until I sold my first company in 2006 to McAfee. It was a security company. And then I thought, and I wanted to invest. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think it was because I did. So I'll just tell you the brief story. Is I have a friend, Ron Conway, who's an investor in my company, and he's a sort of longtime prolific angel investor. And I sold my company, and I said, Ron, I want to learn how to angel invest. And I called him up, and Ron, being the excellent guy that he is, he sent me a list of he always has this list, and it's this list of all of his everything he's working on in life. It's like this. He's very open source. He sends it to me, and I said, can I fly out and meet some of the companies you mentioned? And I did, and I made a few investments. I think my very first one was it was a friend. It was a friend of mine. It was called Scan Scout. Far along later, I think they went public. They got bought by somebody and went public. It's called Tremor Media. I think I haven't followed it lately. What happened since then? But it was right when online video was starting, and it was a video ad network. And I just did it because, and basically all of my investments were like this. It was this guy Wycott, who I knew, who was I think it was a CS MIT, and I crossed paths with him, and I just thought he was really smart. And that's kind of how I did a lot of my investing early on, was just basically really smart people I knew doing interesting kind of future looking stuff. And I made a lot of mistakes. Some of them worked out, some of them didn't. But it was frankly mostly, it's partly financial, but a lot of it was just, this is cool. You can only do so many things yourself. And it's just a lot of angel investing, I find, it's just a way to kind of be involved and be supportive. And so, it's really gratifying years later. Sometimes people will tell me like, hey, you were the first person who wrote me a check or something. I maybe didn't even realize at the time, but it's just sort of a nice way to kind of give back if you've had some success.
Final one, and this isn't a first, this is a favorite. Absolute desert island, gun to your head, the favorite gadget that computer, Sony Walkman, not the best, not the fastest, but the one that you have the most affinity for
on the
personally.
desert. Well, you have no networking on the
but that's why I'm saying affinity, the thing that you personally think back like, God, that was my favorite, even if I couldn't use it now.
I see. That's a good question. I just think, I actually have at home, I have a bunch of devices. So like I have the beautiful original Polaroid, the kind of the iconic one. I have a original Game Boy V1 on my shelf. I have the original V1 Mac. I have my first iPhone, which looks like a postage stamp now. I feel like, who else? I love, obviously, I think Steve Jobs was sort of the Thomas Edison of the second half of the 20th century. And all of those devices are iconic. I think, to me, Polaroid, Edwin Land is sort of underrated. I think Sony Walkman. Like, I think to me, Morito, Jobs, and Land are probably the three engineer designer archetypes, and created some of the most beautiful products. So I'd put probably anything, a lot of the Sony Morito era, right? That original kind of the yellow Walkman, what else of his, just some of the old classic radios, just all of that kind of era, the Trinitron. I think those three.